Yeah, yeah, and they can't do anything. They can't do anything. And when so Second Corinthians, I forget where it says that God doesn't allow us to be tempted beyond our ability. The only tempter there is Satan. So he allows for him to do that. For what end? He does that so that we're able to be tested in it. So we've talked about testing in Exodus. It's very important to God that He knows already. It's important to God that we know just how um, reckless we are, and that we need to be more in tune with Him, more trusting in Him. All right, I think we got to chapter 30, did we, last week? I think so. We're still in God giving instructions about various things, and I'm not going to go through all of this again, but the verse chapter 30 begins with the incense altar. But I do want to get down to verse 6 there, where it says, "You are to place the altar in front of the curtain by the ark of the testimony, in front of the mercy seat that is over the testimony, where I will meet with you. Aaron must burn fragrant incense on it. He must burn it every morning when he tends the lamps." So you recall that the lamp burns all night, and and the fragrance burns the incense burns all the time. So he's to take care of this every time he tends the lamp. He must burn it every morning when he tends the lamps. When Aaron sets up the lamps at twilight, he must burn incense. Boy, there's a big discussion in Scripture about what is actually twilight. Is twilight when the sun's going down, or is twilight when the sun's coming up? So in English, we've solved the problem. It's dusk to dawn. But twilight, so in England, twilight's when the sun's starting to go down. That's right. So I think that's why it's translated twilight here. It's more universally understood as the sun going down. Um, there is to be an incense offering before the Lord throughout your generations. You must not offer unauthorized incense on it, or a burnt or grain offering. You are not to pour a drink offering on it. So what does he mean? There's certain incense that God ordains to be used, and nothing else is to be burned there, because there's a lot of burning going on. So what's the practical side of this? There is a practical side, because uh, for lack of a better way of describing it, the temple was a slaughterhouse when you begin to read about everything that was going on there. And that's odorous, and not in a good way all the time, right? If you've ever cleaned an animal for, a deer or a pig or anything, there's odors that come with that are not pleasant. And so the incense was there to counteract that, and God wanted it that way. He didn't want the experience of worship to become an unpleasant activity. So he arranges for these things so that there's never an excuse. There's never a derogatory idea about it, and that's part of it. Um, so it says once a year, Aaron is to perform the atonement ceremony for the altar. So atonement means to cleanse. So this is a cleansing ceremony once a year. So throughout your generations, he is to perform the atonement ceremony, for it once a year, with the blood of the sin offering for atonement on the horns. The altar is especially holy to the Lord. So on the Day of Atonement, the altar was cleansed again for the coming service for the people for the year. So there was a sin offering made for all the sins of the people, and these were the sins that were unknown to them, unintentional sins. If you sinned intentionally, there was penalty for that. But unintentional sin, so that you could cover those sins. Now, there was a way to cover your intentional sins, and we'll get into, I think, in Exodus, but it's enumerated in Numbers and Leviticus, so that a person could find mercy, but you had to do it in God's way. Hey, Lee.
Hello, everyone.
All right, the atonement money. Did you know that they had to pay for atonement? Ah, this is important. So the Lord spoke to Moses, when you take a census of the Israelites to register them, each of the men must pay a ransom for his life to the Lord as they are registered. Okay, so remember at the Passover, God allowed for a substitute, which was the Passover lamb. So you did what you were to do with the Passover lamb, and the death angel passed you by. The Egyptians did not have the will of God operating in their life, and so their firstborn died. Here we have again, God is saying that when you register them, and this is something that was, did they do this every year? Was it every 3 years when they did the tithe? There's a lot of discussion about it. But all we know is that he says, when you take the census. We don't know how often it really was. But they're to pay a ransom for his life to the Lord. So it is a reminder. What is it a reminder of? Your life doesn't belong to you, dude. It belongs to me. And so you pay a ransom for it. This is another way that God teaches. Okay? That if you want a life, you've got to deal with me. And so that's what they're doing here. Then it says, then no plague will come on them as they are registered. So pretty stiff penalty. If you don't do this the way that I'm saying, if you don't provide for the ransom, you're going to suffer a plague because of it. And the word plague was the same thing as death. That's really what he's talking about. It's a agonizing death. Everyone who is registered must pay a half shekel according to the sanctuary shekel. That's 20 gerahs to the shekel. This half shekel is a contribution to the Lord. Each man who is registered, 20 years old or more, must give the contribution to the Lord. So this is the fighting men. The wealthy may not give more, and the poor may not give less than a half shekel when giving the contribution to the Lord to atone for your lives. So what's the thing there? It's a half shekel. It's not much.
It's
Yeah, you're responsible for your own life to me. You can't rely on someone else. Doesn't matter how rich they are. Rich guy says, "Hey, I can pay for everybody in my family," and God's saying, "No, that's not how it's going to be." Each person is responsible for their own life. Take the atonement price from the Israelites and use it for the service of the tent of meeting. It will serve as a reminder of the Israelites before the Lord to atone for your lives. So God has cleansed them, made them right before him. This is to remind them. Okay? It goes all the way back to the Passover lamb. Okay? Then he gives instructions for the bronze basin. And in verse 21, he says, or verse 20, whenever they enter the tent of the meeting or approach the altar to minister by burning food offering to the Lord, they must wash with the water so that they will not die. So God's not playing around. He's cleansed them. This is a way to remind them just how serious this cleansing is. So they go, they wash with the water, and they won't die. They approach the altar willy-nilly, just doing it the way that they want to do it, lights out. They must wash their hands and feet so that they will not die. This is to be a permanent statute for them, for Aaron and his descendants throughout their generations. All right, if you want to know how to make anointing oil, here is the recipe. I'm not going to go through it, but um, I don't know where you get 12.5 pounds of liquid myrrh, uh, 6.5 pounds of cinnamon. That might be easy to get your hands on. 6.25 pounds of cane. I wonder if that's sugar cane. 12.5 pounds of cassia. Don't know what that is, and a gallon of olive oil. So you put that all together, and you got your anointing oil. With it, you are to anoint the tent of the meeting, the ark of the testimony, the table with all the utensils, the lampstand with its utensils, the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offerings with all its utensils, everything. Consecrate them, and they will be especially holy. I find that an interesting phrase. Holy is holy. How you become especially holy, I guess, is because of the oil. You're doing this extra step. God has already consecrated it to himself when they have followed his direction in making it. And so this is just makes it especially holy. Whatever touches them will be consecrated. Anoint Aaron and his sons and consecrate them to serve me as priest. So if you touch these items that have been anointed with oil, you too must also be consecrated. It's just one big picture of God desiring holiness amongst his people. And the purpose, all right, so you think about this. One of the things that, I just kicked that again. I don't know why I keep doing that. It's a cord in there. Um, so one of the things we discover throughout this is that the glory of God is very important in all of this. And he's already indicated that we are his glory in a sense. Okay, that his people are. So in order to reflect the glory of God, in order to make it a part of our life, it makes sense that we must be pure in that, so that we experience the fullness of what it is and we can reflect it back to him, give it back to him. And remember, he said that you're all going to be a nation of priests. So as the priests are consecrated and made holy, there's an extension of life here that's being laid out, that when the priests are consecrated and made holy and they act on your behalf before me, you're receiving, in a sense, that same holiness that you're able to give back to God. And so they do it in these various ways. So holiness and cleansing becomes a very important part of life. Now, did that change for the New Testament? People always want to separate the two testaments, but really, does it change? No. How are we made holy? Our faith in Jesus. What else do we do? I mean, there's nothing else. For by faith we're saved through grace. So God offers us this opportunity to be made right with him, and that we are atoned. Same word here that's being used. We're atoned by the blood of Christ. So we are made holy. And as a result of that, we are able to experience the glory of God in a way that it transforms our life daily, because we're living in and through that presence of God. And then that's what we have to offer back to him. What do we have? Uh, there's a Brandon Lake song. I'm all over Brandon Lake these days, called Gratitude. Yeah, I love that song too. It says, what does a pauper have to give to a king but a hallelujah? And hallelujah is just saying back to God, the glory of God. So that's what we have. And we can,
I mean, we have people.
right. Yeah. So, and see, the great part about that is we always know, we can always tell when we're out of sorts with God or not giving back to him what he wants from us, because we can literally feel it, right? You can feel the absence of God because you're just not living in his glory. You're just not living in his presence. You're not allowing him. We can tell, we can feel it. And that's an important gift that God gives us, so that along with discipline and study and prayer and all those other things, when we feel ourselves kind of lagging and not giving our relationship with God the attention that it needs, we feel less bright, I guess is one way to say it. I'm missing that. So it talks about the incense. He already said that there's only certain kinds that are allowed, ordained, and here they are. So he's blend those. I don't know what that is. I guess it's spices, and it gets burned. 36 says, he says, put some in front of the testimony in the tent of meeting, where I will meet you. It must be especially holy to you. As for the incense you are making, you must not make any for yourselves using this formula. What does that mean? This is for me. Yeah. It is to be regarded by you as holy, belonging to the Lord. Anyone who makes something like it to smell its fragrance must be cut off from the people. All right, so who was cut off from the people? We find in the law intentional sinners. They were run out of the camp. So if they found sin in the camp, they dealt with it outside of the camp. And that's why it's a beautiful thing that Hebrews does. That's where God dealt with the sin of his people, was outside the walls of Jerusalem, outside the camp, so that sin could be dealt with properly. All right. So God provides for the skilled workers. He says in verse 3, I have filled him. This is the Uri, son of Hur. I filled him with God's Spirit. So it's the first time I can find where someone is filled with the Spirit. There's been places where it's described like an accompanying with, but not in. So he's filled with God's Spirit, with wisdom, understanding, ability in every craft, to design artistic works of gold, silver, and bronze, to cut gemstones for mounting, and to carve wood for work in every craft. What that must have been like, huh? God says, I'm going to choose you to be a master artist and craftsman. And he may not have ever done anything like that before, and all of a sudden, he's a master at it all.
Like the way he told to Moses. Oh.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he names these other guys that he's chosen to be with him. I put wisdom in the heart of every skilled artisan, in order to make all that I've commanded you. And then he goes through the list of things that he's been commanded to make. So God says, yeah, I'm going to put this guy in charge. He can do it all. And here's these others. They're already skilled, but they're really going to be working under him, and he's going to get this thing done exactly like I've told you. So I'm sure. Well, I would if I was Moses. God's rattling all this off that he wants, and I'm in the back of my mind thinking, how in the world are we ever going to do this? We don't have anybody that can do this. And God says, oh, by the way, I've already figured out who I'm going to have do this. Just let them do it. Okay, observing the Sabbath. We've talked about the Sabbath before and how important it is. And why is it important? Why is it so important for God to have a Sabbath with his people? The word Sabbath means to rest, or literally to quit. So when we do that, we're no longer relying on our own abilities, our own efforts, our own resources. We've said for this day, we're going to honor the rest that God took by resting ourselves. God quit creating on this day. We're going to quit, and we're just going to rely on Him. So it becomes an important thing for a lot of reasons. One is that we're going to rely on Him. We're going to trust in Him. He's going to be our provider. Okay, what's the other thing it does? It creates room for a relationship with God. Okay, that doesn't necessarily include temple operations. Before then, you for everything else you went to the temple. On the Sabbath, what did you do? Nothing. Everybody rested. Okay. What that did for family was important. Everybody's busy the whole week. Everybody's got their assignments. They're all depending upon each other. And for this one day, they're all resting. They've quit together, and they're experiencing each other and life together in a different way than they do the other 6 days of the week. Now, if you've ever had the opportunity to do that, it's quite refreshing to spend that kind of time, uninterrupted, unhurried time with people that you love and care for. It's just special. So all of these things roll into this day, and God knew that it would satisfy our hearts and our bodies in a way that we don't always appreciate today. We're so busy, and we're so reliant upon. If it's not on our own labor, we're so reliant on everyone else's labor. So let's say for a moment that we still kept Sunday the way Sundays used to be kept. Y'all don't remember any of that. Marcella, mate, you couldn't buy gas. All the gas stations were closed. I remember, oh my goodness, for the longest time you couldn't get pantyhose on a Sunday. You couldn't buy them because it was a law. For whatever reason. But Sunday was one of those days. You couldn't buy a car. You couldn't buy gas. The restaurants weren't open. Yeah, grocery stores weren't open because the idea was you don't want to depend on somebody else's labor. Yeah, you're rested.
I
So
remember having
that's right. Couldn't buy alcohol or beer. Um, no, there was a lot of things you couldn't buy. You wasn't yeah. Everything was closed. It was a rare uh, like the Dinner Bell in Macomb. It used to open on Sundays, but that was because everybody in Macomb after church went to the Dinner Bell, and I remember that. My mother's third cousin ran it for a long time, but those kind of things were exceptions. Okay, and you spent that time. You went to church. You spent the day with family. Went back to church.
went to Mama's house.
Yeah, yeah.
His grandma fried chicken. Yep.
So yeah, yeah,
Everybody went to
yeah.
grandma's.
Nobody fries chicken today, but
My mama used to make beef stew and it was like
see the things we remember
Fried
about it.
chicken.
Yeah,
I don't know if there was anything else I could take like fun to beef because I was scared of pop.
yeah. The and now everybody has to get out their calendars to plan a day to get together, and that truly feels like when we are able to do that, it does feel like the old days, which I liked. So the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, you must observe my Sabbaths, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, so that you will know that I am the Lord who consecrates you." Consecrate means what? To be cleansed, set aside. All those things come together in that word consecrate. Let me look at it real quick in the Hebrew here. Let's see if we can find it. Sanctify, be made holy, be hallowed, to prepare. So God is doing all of those things in that word. Um,
So
well, to be hallowed be thy name means your name be made great. So God is using this consecration to make holy, to sanctify. Sanctifies the process of that. To prepare or to dedicate.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Observe the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. Whoever profanes it must be put to death. Yeah, so he's pretty serious about this. Um, if anyone does work on it, that person must be cut off from his people. So you would think that would be the thing that profaned it, but there must have been other ways to profane it. So if you did work, send him out of the camp. Couldn't be with his people anymore. Work may be done for 6 days, but on the seventh day there must be a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Lord, set apart completely for him. Anyone who does work on the Sabbath must be put to death. He says that twice. He's kind of serious about it. So interesting. Up here it says whoever profanes it must be put to death. And then here he says anyone who does work on the Sabbath day put to death. So being put out the camp, it's almost like he leaves it up to them. Which are you going to do? You going to kill them or are you going to put them out of the camp? Because the penalty is listed. If anyone does work on it, the Sabbath, that person must be cut off from his people.
Does that go along with like cooking and everything?
Oh yeah.
So they had to prepare their.
Well, it's a maybe not, but by the time Jesus's day rolled around, it included cooking. It included more than walking more than about 15 yards. That was considered work. They developed all these rules for keeping the Sabbath. That's why Jesus said the Sabbath wasn't made for man. I mean, the man wasn't made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man. So they had saddled them with all these rules and laws in order to honor the Sabbath. And what Jesus was saying was, this is a time that was just to remind them that you're a holy people set apart by God. And because he's asked you to do this, for no other reason you do it. But we've been told already, you do this because 6 days God created, and on the seventh day he rested. So in that process of creation and rest, God is establishing something that's very important for us. First of all and foremost, in our relationship to him, if it's not anything more than simple obedience, but then also for us because rest has value. We all know that. What's the old song? You work your fingers to the bone. What do you get? Bony fingers. I mean, you can just work yourself down to nothing. Yeah, yeah. And it's a recuperation, and it's also a reminder. The tithe does the same thing. We're reminded in the Sabbath, oh man, I don't have to rely on myself all the time. God's here. He cares for me. He loves me. He's going to take care of me. That extends into the year of Jubilee and extends into every seventh year, debts being canceled and all those things. It's a way of saying you don't have to worry about it. God's got it. And the tithe does the same thing. Give the Lord 10% because trust him with the 10%. You don't need the 10% if you're trusting God. And in Malachi says, look, God is saying, prove it. I'll prove myself to you if you'll just do it. And of course, in that day they weren't. But so it's the same kind of thing. You give me this, and I'm going to give you more in abundance simply because of the obedience that you're showing. So, 16. The Israelites must observe the Sabbath, celebrating it throughout their generations as a permanent covenant. This is a sign forever between me and the Israelites. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, but on the seventh day he rested, and, important, and was refreshed. So this is another part of it for God. He wants his people to enjoy the created world that they're in. So there's great worth in work, and there's great work in wealth. Some people don't know how. I mean, there's great work in rest. I said, well, there's some people don't know how to rest. They just don't know how to do it. And if you're around them for very long, you begin to understand that they are not very content with their life. Doesn't matter how much they have, doesn't matter how big their house is, where their kids go to school. They work, and they just never seem to be satisfied with any of the things that their work has produced for them. And that's sad. So when he finished speaking with Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets of the testimony, stone tablets inscribed by the finger of God. So the tablets of the testimony, we generally think about those as being the 10 commandments. And the tablets of the testimony were going to go in the Ark of the Covenant, which is the vessel of testimony. Remember, it's got the mercy seat, the lid that's going to go over it. So God's told them how to build a house for this. And it becomes the centerpiece of their life and their life with him. Okay, this is great, because in all of this that's been said and all that comes to pass, God's told them how to live, okay? And he's also told them that when you do this, you remain holy, and there's no threat of death. You're not going to be put to death. So you're made holy, you're secure, and you have a relationship with God that is being mediated by people that have been utterly prepared to do it. So it's created a life. The law has created life between the people and God. And then what happens? The golden calf. Yep, chapter 32. So when the people saw that Moses was delayed in coming down from the mountain, what's the problem? He's up there for 40 days and 40 nights. So when the people saw that Moses was delayed, how soon were they expecting him to come back? Did anybody ever say, oh, I'll be back in 3 days, or I'll be back in 2 days? No. No, they didn't know how long God was going to keep Moses up there, but in their minds, they had decided this is way too long, 40 days. Something must have happened to Moses. This is almost like another test. God chooses Moses. He's given him really the authority over all his people. And so their first assumption about him being gone is something must have happened to him. What does that communicate? They have no idea what trusting in God means. They have no idea what God's sustaining them means. And they've already experienced manna from heaven, quail from heaven, water from rocks. They know already, but they don't trust what they know. So when the people saw that he was delayed coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said to him, you could say gathered as kind. It actually, it's like a crowd. They assembled in a crowd around him, pressing in against him. And they said to him, come, make gods for us who will go before us, because this Moses, this man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. So they've gotten together and they've told Aaron. Now, what does Aaron know about making anything? There's nothing that we know about Aaron up to this point that says that he knows how to make anything, but he's been designated as priest. So the chief thing that they're concerned with here is we want the holy man that God has appointed to make an idol for us to worship him, the idol, and not God. It just really gets crazy when you start thinking about how all this happens. So they crowd around him. They want to make a god, and they call Moses what? This Moses. So you've heard that term used before about people. It's kind of almost derogatory. This, blah, blah, blah. They think they're so. Okay. So that's kind of what this is communicating. That they've tolerated Moses up to this point, and you can look back and you can see that's kind of their attitude toward him. But now that he's been gone, whatever many days that they thought was inappropriate, now they've decided that they're going to just do things their way. Okay. So they want a God to worship. And the interesting part about it is they're still looking backwards, right? This man who brought us from the land of Egypt. Boy, they still got Egypt on their mind. Aaron replied to them, take off the gold rings that are on your ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. He doesn't even hesitate. He doesn't even put up an argument. So all the people took off the gold rings that were excuse me, on their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took the gold from them, fashioned it with an engraving tool, and made it into the image of a calf. Okay. So then they said, Israel, these are your gods who brought you up from the land of Egypt. Man. Okay. So they've replaced God with a graven image. Just like that. Then they said, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it and made an announcement. There will be a festival to the Lord tomorrow. Early the next morning they arose, offered burnt offerings, and presented fellowship offerings. The people sat down to eat and drink and got up to party. So this is interesting. Aaron says, he built an altar in front of it, and he says there will be a festival to the Lord tomorrow. And the way the translators translate that is the Lord. Okay. The word here is Adonai, okay, which we use a lot, or the Greek is Lord Kyrios. Does it mean that he is endorsing a festival they're going to have for the Lord God that is with Moses? Or is he declared now that the golden calf is the Lord? That they've completely shifted their allegiance from the Lord God that it is with Moses. Now it is the Lord. Okay? So early the next morning they arose, offered burnt offerings, and presented fellowship offerings. The people sat down to eat, drink, and got up to party. All right, so they're having the fellowship festival like God had really ordained Moses on the mountain to have. So the Lord spoke to Moses, go down at once. We got trouble. For your people, your people you brought up from the land of Egypt have acted corruptly. They have quickly turned from the way I commanded them. They have made for themselves an image of a calf. They have bowed down to it, sacrificed to it, and said, Israel, these are your gods who brought you up from the land of Egypt. So remember, the 10 was given in earshot of everybody, and they all said, oh yeah, we're going to do exactly what this said, remember? And the first 4 commandments do what? They line out life with God. You shall have no other God before me. You should make no image. All of those things. So they did exactly what they said they would not do. The interesting part of this is that God says to Moses, go at once for your people. So all of a sudden now, they're not his people anymore. Okay? So they got to belong to somebody. And so God's saying they're your responsibility now. These are your people. I gave them every opportunity to be my people, and this is what they've done. So, man, has that changed? No, we don't get to put anything ahead of God if we're going to be his people. Now we can choose not to be his people. Pretty crazy. We could choose that. We just say, I don't want to have anything to do with what God's got to do anything with. Done. And God says, okay, you belong to somebody else now. Okay. And in this situation, it was Moses. He says, these are the people that you brought up. I didn't even bring them up. Of course, he did bring them up, but he wants no part of it anymore. Tough days.
And the only good thing about this is that they realize that they should be worshiping the
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
That's the only good. They realized they needed something that should be worshipped.
So
they went the wrong way,
yeah,
but they felt inside of themselves, we need to make something sacred.
but they did it. They did it looking back. We're going to do it the way we did it in Egypt. We're going to do it the way we saw it done in Egypt. Everything's about Egypt, 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 the place of slavery. We want to go back to slavery, slavery, slavery. That's where the good life is what they keep, without saying it, are saying.
Do you think that was because they didn't really have a personal relationship with God? Their relationship with God through Moses?
Well, they didn't. They were fearful of God, and God had told them, "You should be fearful of me, but I'm making a way for you to be consecrated and cleansed before me, so we can be in fellowship." And he lays out the whole fellowship festival that happens, and he goes to great lengths to allow them as near as he can in a relationship that is fruitful and fulfilling as it can for a God that is ultimately holy and set apart from us, and we are utterly sinful and can't go near him. He does all of that to make that possible, and in an instant, the result is we want to go back to the old life that we had. See? And the other, what brings this on? They're utterly insecure with God. Now, remember when Moses went up the mountain? It was just this ball of fire and the lightning, and there's no indication that that's ever gone away. But they got used to the idea that that was God, but they couldn't get past the fact that Moses hadn't come down the mountain. It almost makes no sense. As long as God is there, I'm not really worried about Moses, because I can see God in all of his glory. I just can't see God, but I can see his glory as he's allowed me to see. I'm going to put my trust. You would think that's what they would have done. But after a few days, I mean, they're saying, no, we need a God to worship. Well, God's right there. The problem is Moses is not there. See how it really is hard to grasp how irrational the whole thing was for them. And then for Aaron just to say, oh, okay, give me all your gold. I'm going to put something together here. And they have a festival. All right. So all of this happens, and God says they have quickly turned from the way I commanded them. That's why we can say this happened almost immediately. Well, 40 days is nothing to God. So even if it took them 40 days to finally decide to do this, because Moses was there for 40 days, then still, that's no time. And if 40 is used to be a complete set of days that is needed for God to do what he was doing with Moses, the writer's letting us know that their trust in God faded almost immediately. They bowed down to it. They sacrificed it. This is the God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. The Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and they are indeed a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger can burn against them and I can destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation. All right. So what is God saying? I'm wiping them out. I'm going to start over. I'm going to start over with you, Moses. Okay. He says, these are indeed a stiff-necked people. What's communicated by um, stiffening the neck? It was an agricultural term. When a beast of burden would stiffen its neck, it was resisting the yoke. Okay. So it was useless at that point. You couldn't use the animal. It had no purpose because you could not get the yoke around its neck. Okay. And so he's saying these people are useless. Yeah, I can't do anything with these people. That's what stiff necked means. I mean, you don't want to be stiff necked to God. So he says, now leave me alone. So yeah, it's almost like he's reading Moses' mind, which is the section we're about to get into. It's like, I don't want to hear it, Moses. Leave me alone. My anger can burn against them and I can destroy them. So God said, I'm heating up and I'm doing away. I will make you into a great nation. But Moses sought favor, uh, sought the favor of the Lord, his God. Lord, why does your anger burn against your people who brought you out of the land of Egypt with great power, that you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and a strong hand? Good question. Why should the Egyptians say, he brought them out with an evil intent to kill them in the mountains and eliminate them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger and relent concerning this disaster planned for your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. You swore to them by yourself and declared, I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of the sky, and will give your offspring all this land that I have promised, and they will inherit it forever. Now, man, this is the greatest counter argument that's ever been presented, because it's in the face of God that Moses is saying these things. And so we're starting out. Moses is not, the passage doesn't allow us to believe that Moses has persuaded God to change his mind. It starts out saying Moses sought the favor of the Lord. So what's that mean?
He asked him for a favor.
Yeah. Yeah. He's saying, Lord, let's think about this another way. Yeah, that's right. So the legend of Yahweh will be that he carried his people out of a land that was a good land. I mean, Egypt, Goshen was a good land where they lived, but he just brought them out here to kill them. So the testimony, no. So Moses is guarding the testimony that will be delivered about God for generations. That's part of what he's doing here. Then he says to remember. So the promise, you can't escape God's promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. It always gets woven back into the story of his people. When things really begin to seem as though it's over for them every time, we are reminded, reading, and the people were reminded at the time, but God remembers the promise that he made to your fathers. So the grace by which we are saved is that promise for us. We are receiving all that Abraham was promised. So he said, remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. You swore to them. It says, so the Lord relented concerning the disaster he said he would bring on his people. relented. Let's see what that. Let's see how that. What that word is. Uh, so it means to be sorry, to regret. Uh, there's other places in the Bible where it describes God as regretting. So in that, we know that he's perfect. He doesn't make mistakes. We know that his character is nothing but pure love. But in our understanding of how God is responding to our sin, we have to understand it in some sort of way. And so we understand it as God relented. He chose not to do a thing that his heart was turned to do. So then Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, inscribed front and back. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was God's writing engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the sound of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, "There's a sound of war in the camp." Remember, Joshua had gone up part of the way. Now, he's been up there waiting for nobody's worried about Joshua. They were just concerned about Moses. Their leader not coming back, which they really wanted to get rid of anyway. He was just a killjoy, I guess. I don't know. But Moses replied, "It's not the sound of a victory cry and not the sound of a cry of defeat. I hear the sound of singing." As he approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses became enraged and threw the tablets out of his hands, smashing them at the base of the mountain. So he's coming down the mountain. Remember, they said, don't go past the base of the mountain. So Moses is in this area now outside of the presence of God. And it's almost like the sin that they're in overtakes him. And he just, he does this thing where later he strikes a rock and it causes him fits, and this is the same thing. So he took the calf that they had made, burned it up, and ground it into a powder. He scattered the powder over the surface of the water, and forced the Israelites to drink the water. So they had to consume the very object of their pagan worship, their idol worship. Boy, what a statement, huh? What you were worshiping, you now consumed. What kind of God was that when you can consume him? Yeah. Then Moses asked Aaron, "What did these people do to you that you have led them into such a grave sin?" He says, "Don't be enraged, my Lord." Aaron replied, "You yourself know that the people are intent on evil. They said to me, 'Make gods for us who will go before us, because this Moses, the man you brought up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him.'" So see how closely connected they've made Moses to God. If Moses is gone, God must be gone, except there's all his glory still on the mountain. Okay? And so Aaron's just about got no backbone at all at this point. Yeah. Don't be mad at me. You've been up here on the mountain. I've been down here having to deal with these people. And that's kind of what it's communicating. And he says, "You know these people. They're just evil all the time." Man, what a thing to say, huh? So Moses in the previous paragraph is saying, God, don't forget the promise that you've made to Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. Oh, yeah. And you can see that the children that they've produced are just evil. they just have nothing in them to be devoted and fidelitous to you. So he said, "I said to them, whoever has gold, take it off." And they gave it to me. And when I threw it into the fire, out came I threw it into the fire and out came a calf.
Yeah.
How crazy is that? So in the previous, it doesn't even say anything about a fire. It just says that he took it and he engraved it into the calf. Here, we threw it into the fire and out came a calf. It must have been ordained, huh? Right? Yeah. The writer lets us know that this is about the tallest tale that Aaron could have come up with to cover his behind side. Moses saw that the people were out of control, for Aaron had let them get out of control, making them a laughing stock to their enemies. So their enemies, we don't know who's watching, but the indication is that there's people outside of the children of Israel that are witnessing all of this. And Moses stood at the camp's entrance and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites gathered around him. He said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Every man fasten his sword to his side, go back and forth through the camp from entrance to entrance, and each of you kill his brother, his friend, and his neighbor." The Levites did as Moses commanded, and about 3,000 men fell dead that day among the people. Afterward, Moses said, "Today you have been dedicated to the Lord, since each man went against his son and his brother. Therefore, you have brought a blessing on yourselves today." Now, that is a tough, tough, tough. That's a hard statement, right? Man, we can't just walk by it. So he tells them in verse 27, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. And so, where did my, here we go. I want to scroll down here. I think it was in this. Nope, that's 30. You find out when you start using commentaries that there's some passages that they just like to omit because they're too hard. But Dr. Kaiser, he does. So he told them, "This is what the Lord, the God of every says: Every man fasten his sword aside, go back and forth through the camp, kill your brother, your friend, and his neighbor." So Moses is not saying this. God gets the credit for it. So he tells them to be absolutely holy, and now he's telling them that they got to absolutely go through and kill those that are closest to them. 3,000 people have paid the price for being stiff-necked. Okay, so what is God doing? Those that have been consecrated to Him, He's turned them into who? The death angel. That's really what's happened here. You've done this unholy thing. You've done this sinful thing, and I'm sending, for all practical purposes, my death angel through the camp. And so there's a penalty. There's a price to be paid for sin. And this is the price. Tough stuff. These aren't holy people that are paying the price. This is just what God exacts. And why are they blessed? Because they're consecrated in doing it. They're acting as God's holy agents as they go about doing this. It's hard for us to grasp because we see all of this through a New Testament lens. Jesus paid the price for our sins. And the reason why that matters, the only reason why it matters, is because he was the one that was holy and blameless in doing it. You see how the tables are turned? God uses his holy consecrated priest to exact the penalty upon his people so that what they've done, their stiff-necked sin, will be atoned for. dealt with. In the New Testament, it is what? It's the sinful people that are bringing death upon the innocent, the one innocent, Jesus. And through that, sin is cleansed. So this is necessary, just as necessary as what God did to his own son through the hands of evil men. Does that make sense? Do you see how they contrast and compare? And we have to look at them that way, because otherwise we don't really understand. Why does God do this thing? He said, yeah, Marcelo's response was, how horrible. It is horrible. And what God would say to us if we were there, this sin is a horrible thing. Especially when I am who I am, which is what the word Yahweh means. Especially when I am who I am to you. You've already experienced so much of me. And to do something like this is just utterly evil and sinful. And it must be dealt with. So the law has already said how to deal when the penalty of death is allowed, but not often required, but is allowed. But here it is required. And so they go through the camp and they take care of business. Okay. So we would not want to be, see, we think of this, we can only think of it. It's so difficult to get outside the New Testament narrative. We can never imagine that this would be a life of blessing. But the only way that we can imagine it is to understand that these were the consecrated holy ones of God in the camp. And that's what he's called us to be. Peter says it how? We're a holy nation, a royal priesthood. That's truly who we are. And so we do approach sin in the same way, but we do it through the life and work of Jesus and how he did it. And how did he do it? How did he take care of sin and death? By loving. That's why he says the greatest thing you can do is to lay down your life for your friend. And so we're taught that to mean not that we've got to physically lay down our life, although some people do. But we've got to put our own interests aside in order to bring about an end to whatever evil suffering that they're under. Yeah. Yeah. So Moses returned to the Lord. So he went back up the mountain and said, oh, these people have committed a grave sin. They've made a god of gold for themselves. Now, if you would only forgive their sin, but if not, please erase me from the book you have written. Meaning, if you're not going to forgive them, please relieve me of my duty. I don't want to deal with them anymore. Kind of a natural response, don't you think? He's tired. He's been dealing with this a long time. The Lord replied to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will erase from my book. Now go, lead the people to the place I told you about. See, my angel will go before you. But on the day I settle accounts, I will hold them accountable for their sin. And the Lord inflicted a plague on the people for what they did with the calf Aaron had made. So this is the first time we've been introduced to a book, right? Do y'all remember? I don't remember any time before this. So, and Moses asked about it. So he's had a conversation with God, meaning that the book means everything's been written down in advance. And so Moses is saying, well, if you're not going to forgive these people, if that's in your book, take me out of the book. Okay? I don't want to have anything else to do with this. And God is basically reassuring him, no, only those that have sinned against me are going to be removed from the book. And Moses is being told, in so many words, you're not one of them. Okay? But we find out later what does happen. That entire generation is left to, I think they get 40 years to remember all that they did. That's left them wandering in the desert. All right. So he ends 32 in much the same way that he began way back when, talking about uh, moving from place to place, that his angel would go before him. But then he still inflicted a plague. Okay. So it's kind of like, why? He's already killed 3,000 people. Well, one of the things we learn in this whole narrative, and even when they go into the promised land, the people are one. So if one sins, the whole camp is being dealt with for that sin. That's why if one sinned and it was punishable by death, everybody went and dealt with the death. Okay. And so this is kind of the same thing. Everybody's going to suffer because you're all in this together. You can't ever claim a place of superiority or anything like that because you're all in this together. You share the burden of your guilt. Okay. Which is another idea that we don't carry, that doesn't carry over into the New Testament. We discover in that we're all responsible for our own sin, and that Jesus has come to deal with it individually with us. All right, any questions or comments or anything else that we need to look at before we scat? Because it's almost time for me to get back on that man. Well, okay. Well, we had some people watch tonight. Hey, 4. Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, I'm saying goodbye. So.
We have to have a chauffeur's license.